Hello again. I hope you remember me from the Harbor Porpoise presentation. This time I will present a topic on pressures on the marine environment, and I will specifically talk about underwater noise and offshore wind development. So I will start with offshore wind development, and then we'll take a break. And after that, I'll come back with underwater noise. So after some of the discussions that you will have offline. Okay, so the Baltic Sea is a very busy seascape. There are several pressures on the Baltic Sea marine environment. These are just few of them that I have presented here. So we have eutrophication that you have probably heard of. Also hazardous substances, maritime activities, fisheries, and the two ones that I will talk about, which are underwater noise and offshore installations, for example, or more specifically of offshore wind farms. But I wanted to take a step back and think of the climate change crisis. And well, we all know that we need to take urgent actions to address climate change. And there's some agreements in place internationally, such as the Paris Agreement, to reach or temperature below 2 degrees or centigrades with an effort to limit it to 1.5. And this means that a substantial reduction of greenhouse gas emissions need to happen, and decarbonization needs to be reached. So to phase out fossil fuels. Renewable energy is a big solution or a big part of the solution, not all, but a big part. And offshore renewable energy is one of the most potential for expansion, specifically offshore wind energy, since it's the technology that is mostly developed and available in the market. However, on the other side, we also have a crisis for biodiversity loss. And this is not only on the marine environment, but in general, globally. So it has been assessed or estimated that 69% of the global biodiversity is in decline. So we need to think of these two different things, and also the role of the oceans that play on climate mitigation and adaptation. So the oceans provide not only biodiversity and economic development, but they also capture and store carbon, and they play a substantial role into sequestrating or storing carbon emissions. And it has also been seen that fully and highly protected marine protected areas actually help improve carbon sequestration because they have undisturbed seabed sediments and also lead to recovery of fish stocks. So we need to think in systems. On one hand, we need to restore and protect the Baltic Sea and the marine environment, and also reach targets for example, marine protection. But on the other side, we also need to phase out fossil fuels and reach decarbonization, and also reach the targets that has been set, for example, such as the Paris Agreement, etc. So in the end, we can't address biodiversity crisis without tackling climate change, because there's of course an impact of climate change on biodiversity, but we cannot either tackle climate crisis without healthy marine ecosystems, since they have a big part on carbon sequestration and mitigation. So just to get into the offshore wind topic, there's been a recent development or policy developments where targets have been updated, and there is a massive speed up and scale up in renewable energy wanted. So EU wants to increase this development across the whole region. And this is because apart from reaching decarbonization, they also want to increase independence and security. So the share from renewable energy sources have been increased to 42.5% by 2030. This means that 42.5% of the energy needs to come from renewable energy sources, and the aim is to reach 45%. So countries have committed in the EU to reach 111 gigawatts to 2030 and to reach climate neutrality to 2050. And now there are legally binding targets to where in 2025, member states need to map the areas for renewable energy projects, including at sea. And in 2026, they need to designate renewable acceleration areas where faster permitting procedures, for example, these areas can be exempt of certain environmental impact assessments. So the process is faster to develop. When it comes to the Baltic Sea, it has a big potential for offshore renewable development, especially for offshore wind. And in this region, the goals have increased 8 times. So we had 2.5 gigabytes to reach to 2030, and now they have been updated to up to 22.3 gigabytes by 2030. So this means that if the EU commitments are going to be reached, the Baltic Sea needs to provide approximately 25% of this renewable energy source share. And as we know, the Baltic Sea, well, is in poor environmental status. So there's a question on how much expansion and how much development the Baltic Sea can actually take. If we talk about impacts from offshore wind energy on marine ecosystems, you will probably think that, or we know that offshore wind and renewable energies are good, as we talked about implementing actions to address climate change. So it's a positive thing that we are phasing out fossil fuels and that we are switching towards renewable energy. However, we must also be aware that there are impacts, negative impacts on the marine environment from this upscaling of developing offshore wind projects at sea, so installations at sea. And the impacts that come from this depend on the phases, on the life cycle of an offshore wind farm. So we have development, construction, operation, and the commissioning. And the development is activities where they are planning, studying the site, thinking or assessing how feasible the area is for developing an offshore wind farm. For the construction, we have transport of materials, installation of the foundations, turbines, etc. So all the construction activities. For the operation, so it's when the wind farm is actually working already and providing energy. There's activities for supervision, maintenance, and restoration. And for the commissioning, we have once the wind farm has stopped working, let's say the life has ended, then there's a potential removal of this offshore infrastructure from the sea. So the impacts will vary depending on each phase that we are talking about within the life cycle. And one effect that can be seen sometimes as positive is the reef effect, because we are introducing hard substances where some species can colonize and even use as refuge areas. And this can lead to increasing biodiversity. For example, if other fish species are attracted, etc., then this could create an habitat and help benthic species and other fish stocks. So this is claimed as a positive effect, usually. However, we also need to think that there are risks, for example, of biofouling, where invasive species can be attracted. So these hard substrates or structures can serve as stepping stones for invasive species. So there's a risk of changing the ecosystem and what naturally was there. For example, if we have a soft bottom area, we are not talking that hard structures were already in place before. So that leads to a change in the ecosystem and maybe of species there. And also we need to think that at the end of the life of the wind farm, if these structures are removed, then we are possibly also removing a habitat, so a whole colonized structure. So those are things that can be as well positive but negative regarding reef effects. There are also some other negative impacts from offshore wind. I will only talk about few, but one is habitat loss and damage to seabed, where, for example, the usual practice or the common practice is to pile drive into the seafloor in order to install the wind turbines into the seabed. So there's a need to position or to really dig inside the seabed in order to put the structures in place. And this can lead to a damage of the seabed and even habitat loss for some species. And specifically for this activity, for pile driving, there's also underwater noise sources. And this is not only from this construction activity, but also during the operational phase of wind farms. So when they are operating, they emit noise as well. And from the maintenance, well, we have ships and other activities happening that can also lead to underwater noise emissions. And these, as I talked in the other presentation about the harbor porpoise, there are very sensitive species to noise. So this, of course, is a threat to marine life. Now, on the surface side, we also have risk of collision and barrier effects. So, for example, birds or bats can collide with or crash with the blades of the offshore wind turbines. And not only that, but it can also lead to barrier effects where some species prefer to avoid those areas where they usually traveled. So this can lead to displacement and also to requiring more energy from the animals to travel to certain distances. There's other impacts. One is sediment spreading and turbidity. So this can reduce when the seafloor or the seabed is disturbed. This can lead to a release of sediments and turbidity. So there's no that much light available for some species. And there's also potential release of nutrients from the seafloor. One of the challenges that from offshore wind is that some impacts are not fully confirmed, or there's a lack of evidence to know how much of an effect, for example, on bats we have. So there's a risk of barotrauma where variations in pressures can happen, and they can lead to physical and physiological damages. So, but this is something that is still lacking evidence, and there's also a need to know, for example, why some bats are attracted to offshore wind farms, etc. So I just wanted to mention it because it's something that has been seen, but it's not 100% confirmed. And well, we have as well cumulative impacts where we have different activities already happening at sea, and we are introducing another activity with many other needs, for example, for shipping, when we transport the infrastructure, or when we want to give maintenance to the offshore wind farm, we need shipping activities, we need other digging or covering cables, etc. So these are impacts that can accumulate in the area and also on time with the presence of other activities. So we are introducing one more activity to where we already have many activities in the Baltic Sea. So strategic planning to where to locate offshore wind is vital, and mostly avoidance of valuable areas for biodiversity, for example, marine protected areas, feeding areas, as we talked about, the harbor porpoise, these very important areas for them to feed or to reproduce, they need to be avoided, and planning is key for this. But I will finish here and you will have an exercise, and then I will come back with the underwater noise topic. Hi again. So now I will talk about underwater noise, the sources and some potential effects. And underwater noise can be from two different sources. One is the natural sources that can happen in the environment, for example, from waves, wind, marine mammals using communication, etc. But there's also anthropogenic sources that from different maritime activities that happen at sea can emit these noises. And there's usually a division or classification of underwater noise from anthropogenic sources. So one is impulsive noise, and this comes from explosions, military explosions, constructions, pile driving in the case of offshore wind, sonars, seismic air guns, etc. And there's also continuous underwater noise from shipping activities and operational. So continuous underwater noise is noise that is present all the time in the environment. So if a wind farm is operating, this noise is being produced all the time. And shipping, we have so many ships in the Baltic Sea that this is a continuous source of noise. And on the other hand, impulsive is very sharp and high frequency noise sources. So noise, in comparison to above water, underwater, it travels very far, and it can even travel across sea basins. So this is something that we need to consider when we emit noises in the underwater, because this will reach very far and to many different habitats and species. So the main sources that we have of underwater noise in the Baltic Sea is from continuous is the commercial shipping. So we have even the ferries that we take, normal shipping to distribute or like commercial goods, etc. And on the impulsive side, we have pile driving from construction activities in the Baltic. And if we talk a bit more about offshore wind, underwater noise emissions happen in all the phases of the life cycle of offshore wind. So when we do surveys, we are emitting sounds through sonars, for example. In construction, we have vessels operating, we have pile driving activities, etc. When we have operations, then the same turbine activity or the blades running, this is creating and emitting sound. And when we decommission these structures, we also have, again, shipping activities and the actual removal of structures that produce noise. But if we go to shipping and vessels, because it can be commercial shipping and even recreational boats, how the noise is produced from these engines, it's, in simple words, is from the bubbles that the propeller produces when it's working. So that is the main source of underwater noise, and this is called cavitation. So the bubbles that are produced when they are crashing, that's what is causing the noise underwater. And of course, these noise emissions will depend on the size of the boat and also on the speed of the boat that the boat is traveling. And there's other things that also can impact underwear noise in the boats or in the vessels. That can be hull design and also the wake field, like the trace of water that is leaving behind. So the impacts on marine life can be several, and this is actually a critical pollutant and a major conservation problem for marine species. As we talked about, harbor porpoise, marine mammals are very sensitive to noise emissions, but there's also other fish and invertebrates and even diving seabirds that are sensitive to underwater noise. And the impacts, as I talked as well in the harbor porpoise presentation, can be diverse. So one is physical, where the growth and development of the species can be affected by noise. The communication that is interrupted by these noises underwater. Also the behavior when they are reproducing, resting, they need to avoid or they need to be displaced because of these areas that are emitting noise. And of course, some species can get scared or disturbed by this source. There's also impacts on predator-prey interactions where they can't find prey because of, for example, echolocation, where they need to emit noises to actually measure the distance to the prey, and physiological and anatomical damage where the actual hearing or the physical bodies can be disturbed or damaged permanently or temporarily. So what can we do to reduce noise as individuals? If we like to go to cruise ships, or if we like to have boats, motorboats, jet skis, etc., this is something that is emitting underwater noise. And one source or one solution that we could do is to maybe prefer sailing boats and also maintain the propellers and the whole clean. So there's actually evidence that if we clean and maintain regularly the propellers, this can reduce the underwater noise. And also maybe look for other technologies and designs of propellers. If we are using these constantly, for example, in summers, we can try to reduce the use and also avoid sonars if we are going to fish. Sometimes the sonars are all the time on. So if we are not using them, we can actually turn them off and stop emitting these noises underwater. Also, if we like to go very fast in the jet skis, etc., this is something that we can also try to avoid. So rapid acceleration is something that also helps to reduce underwater noise emissions. And also avoid important areas. So being aware of the areas that are of high value for biodiversity and avoiding these areas can help to reduce disturbance of a species. So the good thing about noise is that this is an immediate effect. If we are not producing noise, there's no disturbance. So for example, if we compare it to eutrophication, this threat or this pressure takes a very long time to be reduced because we need to work on reducing the emissions and for them to like not end up in the water, etc., and the eutrophication of nutrient levels to go down over time. But in noise, if we are not emitting it in the moment, then the disturbance is not there. So there's a lot that we can do as individuals to reduce this and also push for other actions, for example, more towards commercial shipping, where we can push our politicians to have some or avoid some important areas for biodiversity through commercial shipping. So this is a topic on underwater noise. And again, if you have questions on these two pressures or harbor porpoise, you can always contact me, and this is my email. And I hope you keep enjoying the course, and hopefully we meet offline sometime soon. Thank you.